Bonjour à tous.
Good morning. I think we're ready to start this conversation. And, well, this morning we'll be talking about the impacts of AI on employment. Before we start, this conversation will be both in French and in English. Some of our speakers, as you will see, will be French speakers or speak French really well, and others are English speakers. So we'll be switching from French to English and back to French. If you need simultaneous translation, please grab a headset. You have headsets that you can grab before you get in this room. Now, today, to talk about this topic, which is AI and employment, I'm surrounded with 5 speakers who will be talking about their views on the matter. As you will see, we'll have some complementarity between the different speakers. Jan Sternicki is the head of Department of Economy and Innovation, Konrad Adenauer. He is an expert in the field, and he works in innovation, and he works on policy making. Close to him, we have Mathieu Courtecuisse, who's the founder and chairman of CSEA, one of the main advising groups or firm in AI, and he's been guiding and supporting companies through the digital transformation for the adoption of AI. Close to him is Onyekwana, sorry for the name, I hope I pronounced it correctly. You are the executive director at Center for the Study of Economies of Africa. You're an economist, you work on economic development, skills, productivity, and the challenges that new technologies represent for emerging economies. Close to him, we have also let me find the name. Dora Meredith. Dora is heading ODI Europe and the Brussels-based think tank of ODI Global, and she is in charge of the European strategy at ODI Europe. She was program manager at the Institute for Future of Work. And then finally, Rosamund Sibel, who is the director at Lantern Associates, and before that she was in charge of advising the International Institute for Strategic Studies. She is a specialist in geopolitical risks and geoeconomic risks. She's an advisor. She's going to tell us more about AI, and we'll look at the international and geostrategic strategic backdrop. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining the conversation. Right, now let's try and keep our focus on the topic at hand, that is AI and employment. I'd like to take 2 stances, 2 views on the matter. The first position, or the first stance, will be an economic stance. What should one expect from AI, and what are the effects of AI on jobs? So people talk about AI. Sometimes people say that AI is going to replace all jobs very quickly. So that's appalling, that there will be massive effects, and usually this is what companies say, the companies that develop AI, or the CEO, the bosses. But the economic analysis is much more complex than that. We know that AI is something which might replace some tasks and might replace some jobs, but also with AI we can augment human beings and augment productivity. So there are 2 effects, you see, that might look contradictory or going in adverse directions. Increasing the productivity of the workforce, that's good, and the other effect would be the replacement effect, which would be negative for employment. And the whole thing is to know where the cursor is for companies. How will companies use technology? What will they do with technology? And how can we strike a balance? So far, these technological revolutions had an overall positive impact on employment, but we know that there's also a distributive effect, which is not neutral at all. There will be losers and winners with the distributive effect. That's one of the questions we'll be talking about. The second aspect, the second stance, if you will, is the geopolitical dimension. Well, we saw that several weeks ago. For instance, when the US banned the use of Fable and Mythos 5 from Anthropic to the non-American nationals and or residents. So there's this geopolitical distribution which is very unequal. That is, the powers are in the hands of a very few number of countries and few companies, and this poses questions such as sovereignty. And it's not just about using these models, it's also connected to data, access to data, where the data is stored, security of data, capital expenditure or investment. So these are the two sides, if you will, the two angles that I'll be taking so that we have this conversation. Let us start with the first position. That is, let's talk about jobs and employment. And the question I'll ask is, what have you seen? And what would you say about this issue? That is, effects of AI on jobs and employment. Now, Jan, what would you say about this evolution and the pace of transformation? What's your take on that? What are the likely effects on employment? I'll be speaking English, thank you.
First of all, we are still in a very early phase of adoption of AI. I mean, it may seem a little strange because we're discussing this topic for quite some years now. But still, we don't see the big picture. We don't have very good data now. So what we can see is, of course, maybe we can expect transformation. Transformation, as you said it before, brings about change. We will have some sectors in which jobs will disappear, and others we will have new jobs. That happens anyhow. But what we see now is something that is not completely new, that we have not seen before. It's the pressure is on the job on the rather well-paid people. So we can see substitution in the early stages and the early adopters, and then of course are companies that already use software are highly digitalized, so they it's easy there to be more productive using AI. I mean, if you sell software, it's rather easier to just put your code into ChatGPT and ask it to debug it. It does it rather well, and you just save employment. So it's easy. That has been done already. It brings pressure on people like young programmers have issues to find jobs. 10 years ago, they didn't have any problems for that. That is new because we don't know yet how well paid people lose their jobs. So the pressure on social systems may be lower than we expect because these people may be able to adopt differently than people that in other transformations lost their jobs, which were in many cases unskilled laborers. So that is the difference we see. And maybe I leave it here to not talk too much for that, but that's one effect that is new. And for the rest, we don't know so much what happens in industrial sectors because it's more difficult if you produce cement. You can't ask ChatGPT, just make my process better. That doesn't work. So you need people to do it. And here we didn't see so much effect on the industry yet. And that is the interesting part. Will there be a big effect on the industry? Of course, less than in programming other things, but that's yet to come.
C'est un peu la différence entre.
And that's the difference between what we're seeing today, what's really visible, that is AI based on the LLMs versus the development of an AI that's more complex, that's more suited to companies, a real-world AI that people are developing. There are limits to these LLMs, the large language model. Now, Mathieu Courtecuisse, what about you? You are an advisor to companies. What have you noticed? What about the adoption pace, for instance? What would you say about the companies when they use AI? What are the impacts on employment? Does that really have an impact on production processes, the organization of companies? What are the effects on companies? Well, everybody's realizing today that we have an abundance of intelligence today. That's a new era. It was a scarcity, and now we have it in abundance. What does that mean? This is the Spotify of intelligence or smartness. We can use intelligence and smartness in an easy way today. Now, if we look at the workstations, if you will, there are two ways of looking at things. First, the redistribution between the supervised tasks and supervision. That is, what we're seeing is the end of tasks executed by humans when they were supervised with a supervisor. That means that all these people who were the white colors will have now to become supervisors, which means that we'll be monitoring agents, thousands of agents that will help us do the job. This poses a specific problem for the learning curve of the younger workforce. Because if they want to have a value on the job market, they have to become a supervisor and not the supervisees. In the past, it would take 3 or up to 10 years before you would become a supervisor. This layer, if you will, is disappearing. And also, what we're seeing as well is a rebalancing between the white colors and the blue colors. Over the past 20 or 30 years, what we've seen is that the Western economies have produced a lot of paperwork. We've created lots of back office jobs, and AI will kill the back office jobs. And the educational system in Europe and in the US was designed so as to make sure that people were trained for compliance, for paper work or office work or back office work. And in a couple of years, these will have disappeared. And this poses another question. We don't just work with companies, as you know, as advisors. We work with organizations, and there will be instances where civil servants will disappear. So these paper-related jobs, as I call them, will disappear. Yet there are many new opportunities if clerical jobs disappear. And we still have to have other skills. We have to cast a critical eye on things, and we'll have to be polymaths, that is, to be able to control different business lines in parallel. These will be critical resources in the future, and also creativity. Back to the hard sciences. And this is an important decision to make when we look at the educational system, because we can't have an educational system which is not designed correctly, given the skills that we will need today and tomorrow. It's an incredible moment. There will be productivity gains that will be incredible. I live in the US. And what I see in the US, and I'm a bit worried, I see that there's a divided gap, if you will, between productivity in the US and productivity in Europe. We can talk about this later on if you want to. And that is, Europe will become poorer if we don't adapt quickly. Okay, now we've seen this big rebound in productivity in the US in the couple of past years or 3 years, and that's only the early stages. I agree with you. And if you look at adoption rates, AI adoption rate, it's really massive. And in Europe, the main thing is to adopt AI and to use AI in companies. That's one of the big challenges. We'll take perhaps a bit of a different view.
Chukwuka, because I mean, you live in Africa, and Africa, I mean, is the fastest growing geographic area in terms of demography, with a lot of young people, and also a lot of service jobs. And a lot of these service jobs, notably services to businesses, which is a big source of jobs for young people, are also at risk of being automated by artificial intelligence. So what is your take on the risk, especially for Africa, and the opportunities as well?
Right. So in terms of, like, I'll start by saying that there's a disruption in technology. We've seen that with the steam engine. We've also seen that with electricity. The only difference with AI is that it's diffusing faster across different industries at an unprecedented level. In terms of its effect on deployment, of- like I said previously, it depends on the task and the kind of jobs that are available in the economy. When AI will substitute more routine, repetitive, and predictable tasks, such as data processing, a lot of routine kind of tasks. But the tasks that involve more human interaction, innovation, creativity, physical dexterity are more or less exposed and to AI. So it depends on so in the short run, we will see a net decrease in jobs, especially in Africa. But in the long run, we are likely to see um, AI creating new kind of jobs, uh, digital scientists, AI governance specialists, the cybersecurity analysts, and the likes of them. But for Africa specifically, um, we on a positive thinking positively, we expect the young population, which are increasingly adopting digital transformation, to embrace AI as a way to, leapfrog into industrialization. But there are constraints. Africa still battles with digital infrastructure gaps, limited access to high quality data, and even skills shortages. The key aspect of AI is that you need to reskill and retool, um, you know, the public on how to use AI effectively. So, in case of where AI disrupts the job market, it will. But the problem is, in awareness of that disruption, how are you shaping policies to ensure that you use AI to enhance productivity and effectiveness in industries?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Dora, I mean, we've seen now that there's going to be certainly an impact, and quite different from different people, and probably also quite different from different sectors as well of the economy. Even though the net effect is quite uncertain, there's going to be big changes. So, what is your take on this, and what is your perspective from also from a policy point of view?
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be on this great panel. So thank you. I agree with everything that's been said, and I think just a couple of other thoughts came to me as we were just talking there. I think it's not just a question of kind of who's going to win, who's going to lose, but also really who's deciding and what this technology does and on whose behalf. So the first point I wanted to talk about is really the design of the technology and how we use it is a policy choice. It is a choice being made by companies and governments that are enabling those companies. It, and I think you might have seen Asamoah written quite extensively on this. He's arguing that actually the same underlying technology, which is currently being designed to displace workers, could be more actively shaped to be augmenting them, as you say, and that is very much a choice, and that we need to be having much more public debate around whether that's the right decision, or whether we should be saying to the financial backers of these companies and the companies themselves, look, you have a responsibility for the societies and economies that we want for the future, and that we should be designing them with the human flourishing at the centre. The second point I want to make is something I've been thinking about, that it's not just about the jobs, it's also about the knowledge itself. There's a lot of debate about displacement, but actually, if AI is increasingly generating the analysis, the research, the judgment that societies are relying on, it does that by training on a shrinking pool of material that humans have generated, then the system starts consuming its own inputs. And that's partly a problem for institutions, but actually there's a problem there for all of us, because it's really, it has the possibility of impacting our own ability to think and to critically analyse things that are being told to us. I actually reread Mill's On Liberty recently, and if you know the text, you'll know he says, in order to have knowledge, you really need public debate to discuss it and to that, the importance of having public debate. And it struck me, wow, that's actually very true for what's happening with AI. Mill argues if you have a true conclusion and you just take it on trust rather than working it out for yourself and rather than defending it, then you get what he calls a dead dogma. You've lost your ability to defend it, to adapt it. And that only comes from weighing up evidence. And that's the real risk that I'm seeing in terms of how we're deploying AI now. If the model is handing you the finished analysis, it's already assembled, and if you imagine that going to other sectors, you're stripping out that friction and that ability to critically analyze and engage with it. And I think that's really crucial in the way that humans actually create knowledge and learn. So, just to go back to the question, I think the labour market question is very important, and I completely agree. But I also think we need much more public debate on how we're designing and using this technology, and how can we design it in a way that doesn't erode some of our own, crucial skills that are very important, not just for the economy, but also for us as a society.
Okay, thank you. And before we move to the geopolitical aspects, we talk a lot about, for instance, about regulating AI internally or internationally. There's a lot of discussion about trustworthy AI and how we should regulate these models. I mean, how can these discussions be useful from the point of view of the distributional effects of AI in terms of employment and income? What is your take on these debates on employment and income?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think in terms of regulation and policy, it's interesting to see regulation and policy as a theatre of conflict. And I think we're seeing it more and more. If you think 3 weeks ago, you mentioned this just now, Stefan, the US suspended Anthropic's most powerful models for all non-Americans. That was, I think, 90 minutes notice. So that ban was lifted a couple of days ago on Washington's terms, but it follows a clear pattern of US leveraging access to advanced technologies. So if you think of NVIDIA chips, you think of Anthropic, you think of OpenAI's GPT 5.6, that was restricted to just 20 US government-approved partners. I think last week, the EU signed up to Pax Silica, but actually everyone who'd already signed up to Pax Silica, they were also restricted from Anthropic's, most latest technologies. So my point is that joining the table doesn't protect you from the next ban. So regulation itself is a powerful instrument of conflict. So, I mean, we can talk about this later, but I mean, it's not just regulation as a theatre of conflict. We have actual kinetic conflict, as we saw in the Gulf. We had data centers in the UAE and Bahrain being hit. But I think when we think about the deeper strategic context, there's a huge contest now between China's leading AI models, they're open source, you've got America's, which are being locked down. So Beijing is largely betting that diffusion's going to beat restriction, that we're going to get Chinese AI embedded in global infrastructure, they're going to set the standards, they're going to build dependencies. And Washington's betting on control, so both can't win, right? And this is like part of the regulation battle. So I think that the choice is going to be political and technical. So it's going to be a regulatory question. Which ecosystem are you going to build on? I think we're going to build on that later.
I have one question to all of you, actually. What is most urgent from the point of view of governments right now to adapt to this new playing field with AI? Is it about investment? Is it about education? What's really urgent to prepare the workforce and also firms to this revolution and to make sure that we benefit from it. Maybe Mathieu, because I know that you have some ideas on this, but please, all of you, do not hesitate to.
Je reste en français du coup?
Oui,
Ouais, ok, voilà.
I'm going to switch to French. Well, at macro level, if we take the white collars, for instance, it's not a risk. Automation is not a risk. You talked about risk. It's an opportunity, actually. Who wants to do a job that potentially is repetitive or actually painful, you know? No. The risk is not here. All things being equal, we will automate 10, 30, 40% of tasks that are performed by white collars. But this is an opportunity. And then the economy should redeploy everything back out. But the problem is that 30 to 40% of the workforce will be changed into American tokens. Something that is on our French territory will go to the US infrastructures. And that is where the problem lies in terms of trade balance. This is where we're going to see a problem. We're talking about 100, 150, 200 billion dollars of GDP in Europe going towards the US. And this is, we're talking about something that's been funded in the ballpark of 1 trillion per year. So, and this is converted into US tokens. This is where the problem lies. So when we talk about emergency, this has been gone for quite some years already. And I was seeing at a candidate from the Central Bloc saying we're going to invest 50 billion by 2040. The Americans have invested 15 to 20 trillion by 2040. So there's a problem of scale. So yes, there is an emergency. There's a problem with infrastructures and facilities in the US. When we say that we have electric excess in Europe, the Americans look at you with open eyes and say, how is it possible in 2026 that we have a problem with electric surplus in Europe? It is not possible. That means that we haven't managed to connect all the infrastructures to draw in the savings. There's indeed a funding problem that is huge, and there are things to do that should be done now. The Germans have started to understand that it was important to do something, and they've started doing something with the pension funds, but we should gear savings towards infrastructures. Then education is another kettle of fish. It's very complex. But we have to embrace the fact that we have to reduce the duration of studies at university, because why should they have masters for in 2, 3, 5 years? Because things are going too swiftly. They have to work on the field as quickly as possible. We should discontinue this scramble for a university system that is no longer adapted for the working world of today. Are you talking about the content? Because there's not enough content, either scientific or creative content, because we're not trying to leverage AI enough. Why is it not adapted? There's a matter of content, of educational methods, of numbers. In the US, 50% of the society goes to the university. In France, it's 70%, but it doesn't mean that in France we're more intelligent than the American ones, you know? So what we have to do is reposition ourselves. We have to be more selective in how we do things, and we have to have a high-quality education system, have more practical trainings with internships, to have more flexibility and an agile working environment with the younger professionals. We're going to have a sacrificed generation if our younger professionals and younger students are not learning AI soon enough. How about you? What is your point of view, Jan? What do we have to do in emergency not to have a sacrificed generation, to make sure that we can use AI as much as we can and to exploit and harness its digital as much as we can.
What I was about to say is, you ask if it's education or infrastructure to invest in, and I agree to what Matthew said. Of course, we need to reform our education systems from the beginning, and I mean from the process of learning, reading, and writing. We have to change what we learn at the moment, and the governments need to invest in education and only in education, and also in training. Training chances on the jobs, that people that have jobs can learn new things and be able to use AI. On the other hand, I don't believe that governments in Europe need to invest in infrastructure here, because if the gains in productivity are as high as we hear at the moment, private companies will be happy to invest in that. And if not, they don't. And if they don't see a market in that, then they will not do it. The only point which may hinder them from investment is pressure from other countries, mainly America, because why would you invest in a market where others dominate it already and you can't come in? I mean, traditionally we had this before. There were situations in which countries needed to protect themselves against dominating industries from other countries, and there were tariffs. So I think the solution can't be to say, no, we need to be a global market, and if somebody dominates us, we just subsidize with billions and trillions to catch up. And then setting up infrastructure that's used by private companies. So we need to look at models how also trade policy comes in. I don't want to talk about protectionism and being alone in Europe. Of course, we are connected, but still, dominance from other companies or from states like China needs to be countered with measures on trade level, and that's the thing we have to do. Additionally to education.
Okay, so you say education first. In terms of, I'm not a specialist of this, but I was thinking that infrastructure in terms of data centers, for instance, is extremely important. I was also thinking that before being able to use AI, you also need to be digitalized. So you need access to broadband and you need access to data. So
who's going to pay it? Who's going to buy it? And who's going to construct it? State or companies?
And that's a good point, but don't you think there's a place for industrial policies in this? No? Okay, that's good. That's good. We have a debate. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, there's need for digitalization. And like in the African region, there are a lot of underserved communities. Because what AI can do is that it can exacerbate the unevenness, the inequality that already exists in terms of technological adoption, because there are differences across countries. There's also the urban and rural divide in technology and digitalization levels. So I think the important policy issue is investments that promote affordable access to AI technology, because the more affordable it is, the more diffuse across sectors, across different categories of people, and then that will also increase the chances of it enhancing productivity, especially for the underserved regions. So there's need for investments in digital infrastructure, skills, and also access to high quality data, broadband internet for AI adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dora, Rosamund, on these policies, industrial policies, do you think there is a place for that? Especially in particular in Europe or other places in Africa?
Yes, and I think when it comes to infrastructure, we need to think primarily about energy. Now, Europe, we have a problem. Our energy costs are, for gas, we pay 3 times what China pays. We pay 3 times what the United States pays. We really need to think about that when it comes to AI infrastructure. So if we think of AI, it's not just a cloud, it's electricity, it's water. The US hosts 51% of the world's data centers. We've got a handful of American companies who are spending, I think, something like 650 billion this year on infrastructure alone. China has a strategic advantage. They have access to cheap, reliable, secure energy, and those 3 things are what are going to define the winners of this AI race, right? So if you think of data centers, cooling systems, grids, and China's generating twice as much electricity as the United States, that's growing 6% annually. It connects new AI facilities at speed. So I think, Western markets, we are facing a real problem, actually. We have been here before. Europe needs to wake up. We became dependent on Russian gas, as we know. We saw what happened there. Germany closed its nuclear plants. Today it digs up lignite. It imports nuclear fuel from France, nuclear power rather. So I think this is a real message that industrial policy has to adapt to the AI generation, the future that we're going to live.
Dora?
Yes, I agree. I think this does require government to have this joined up thinking across different policy areas. So yeah, absolutely energy, but also the external sort of supply chain. So for me, it's really about the partnerships that Europe needs to build to enable the supply chains, but also, not just in the AI stack, but also for energy and things like that. And to be working with partners on regulation. So we've seen that already happening in Europe. There is already work, for example, with Brazil on data adequacy. There are new digital partnerships which are being rolled out. And I think these things are crucial because you can't possibly address these issues as one continent alone. Secondly, I think indeed the investment is absolutely needed, both in terms of infrastructure in Europe, but then also thinking about the wider supply chain. In Europe, there is the Global Gateway Programme, which is making investments across the world, including on digital areas, and I think that's very much welcomed and the direction that things need to be going. And then education, as we've talked about, and finally regulation. So trying to make sure you've got the regulations in place to help guide companies who are also making the investments. At a previous role at a different think tank at the Institute for Future of Work, we'd had so much feedback from companies saying, we want some regulation. It's just that the regulation's coming quite slowly compared to where the technology is. And I think governments need to wake up and, listen to that call and respond.
Okay, I've got a question then to all of you again. I mean, some companies, notably the small, medium-sized companies, might find it difficult in some countries to adopt AI because it's costly or because they don't really see the full benefits of adopting it. Do you think there is a place there for some incentives for these companies to adopt AI? I mean, some countries are thinking about creating this special subsidies for research and development or adoption of these special technologies, of these new technologies, with a special tax deduction, for instance, when you adopt AI. Do you think this is useful or a waste of money? I mean, maybe Jan and then you, Andor.
Yes, maybe don't surprise you if I say I think there's a waste of money.
Okay.
Because, I mean, again, if we look at the companies that have the highest productivity gains in the last years, it were companies that adopted AI. Of course, as I said before, it's easy for a software company to gain productivity gains quickly by using AI. But again, I also don't subsidize companies to introduce specific machines. Okay, sometimes we do this with tax incentives. But I also think that doesn't make lots of sense. But I mean, why would I subsidize a company to introduce technology that helps them earn more money? If AI is as good as we think at the moment, companies should directly have it and use it. And if the only problem that I could see is that people don't know how to use it, and that's education again. So yes, we should invest heavily in education and training in literacy on AI because AI is complex. AI is, it is maybe easier if you're a software company, as I said before, and you just put your code in the chat and it corrects it automatically.
Donc l'éducation, c'est la première.
So the question is education is the first barrier.
And if
Sorry for switching French and English.
because AI is not software. AI is more hardware. Yeah? If you are a company and you get AI, you don't have a solution. Then the work starts. Then you have to adopt it to your processes. You have to train the people to use it, and you have to fix your data. In many cases, you have different kinds of data formats that are not compatible with AI. So there's lots of work to create an environment in which you can use AI. That is something that people need to know how to do. And if they don't, it's difficult. So education, training is very important. But then, if people know how to do it, companies should be able to use it and to earn money with it. So no subsidize besides for education and training.
Mathieu.
Non, je pense que la subvention, c'est une forme.
Mathieu, no subsidies is too much, going too far. It's like the state is playing too much of a role, not good as such. What we need to do is to invest more in infrastructures, to give more licenses for people to invest. So it's a pact that we need for policy, from policymakers, so that we have private investments, sometimes a bit of subsidies for our infrastructures. And as you were saying before, when you were talking about the adoption by SMEs, if you look at the revenue structure of Google or OpenAI or Anthropic, these are the most dynamic segments. And the small-sized businesses are going faster usually when they adopt AI compared with the large corporates. They don't have 10 people in the compliance department or legal department saying, now, where is your data processed? No, they don't have this, and therefore they go fast. If you look at adoption rates, it's viral. The problem is in large corporates, I would say, and I'm not even mentioning the administration. Right, someone mentioned education. Don't you think we need to help people train their employees? No. Education, but not training. I think there was a French candidate who wanted to have an AI plan, train people to use Word or to use a phone. No, this is silly. Well, there are training packages for Word in some countries. Okay, you're going too far. Stop that. Do we need a national plan for that? No. We can think perhaps about vocational training in France, which costs an arm and a leg. Maybe we can ask that question so that we have a better earmarking of the funds. No. Give more freedom to people. Give them the general framework, the regulatory framework for people to do this. May I insist on something that is, in France, we love regulating. Regulate something we don't produce. First you need to produce and then regulate. It's like sharing the wealth. You have to create wealth in the first case. So Europe sometimes regulates before producing. And the stance taken by politicians vis-à-vis the American administration is that they don't focus enough on regulation. We should have a transaction-based approach. And there are good things that we can do in Europe. First, we have talents. You said earlier on that, Mythos and Fable 5 were banned for a while, but we realized that 60% of the engineers in Anthropic were not American, and most of them were Europeans, and they no longer had access. Correct. My point is that there's one thing we know in Europe that we have is talents. We have many talents. We have scientific talents. The problem is the framework, that is access to finance and infrastructure. But yet, these are very important problems. Europe has to understand that we are a third world continent in the field of AI. It's not a problem. We have to look at reality the way it is. And then what really matters is to catch up. That is trade-offs. We need to sign deals, not to produce more rules. And there are technological breakthroughs that are coming, and Europe should work on that, which is exactly what the Chinese did 20 years ago, 30 years ago in the car making industry. There was a catch-up and they innovated at the same time. We are in the same position today, let's face it. Okay, Dora maybe.
Really agree with this position, so I think it's a nice to have your point of view as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. I mean, it's an interesting question. To what extent should the state be subsidizing these things? Because previously I worked in the R&D policy space, and there was always a challenge, not just in terms of getting family firms to invest in R&D, but also the big corporates to say, actually, you need to be focused on reinvesting into some of these future technologies. So I do think, there can be a space to create incentives for companies to be making that space within their planning to say we're going to be investing in these things. But I also do agree it's not just about the money. Indeed, it's about training. It's about having, support, creating an enabling environment for companies to understand what's the latest sort of in terms of technology development. Again, I previously worked on innovation policy, and there we'd often take companies out to visit other markets so they could see how things were developing elsewhere outside of Europe. And, I personally think that's a very valuable role that government can sometimes play in opening doors for companies who might not have access to their counterparts in other countries. So I do think having a more sort of active, holistic approach of government creating the enabling environment for companies for adoption is worth considering.
Chukwuka, what do you think about this role of governments in terms of supporting firms and workers?
So I don't think the government should subsidize firms. They should rather invest in infrastructure, data centers, and skills, because that investment will actually reduce the cost of AI adoption in the long run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that. It's okay. Initially, you remember that I wanted to separate the impact on employment and the geopolitical aspects, but we've naturally mixed the two. Okay. So I kind of failed on that, but I would like to go back to the geopolitical aspects. With you, Rosamund, notably, what do you think now from Europe's strength and weaknesses? You've mentioned already a number of weaknesses, notably in terms of energy. Do you think we have strength in this or in this competition for AI?
So anyone who listened to the Prime Minister's address yesterday would remember that he said that France in particular has got the skills, knowledge, expertise to actually build resilience in this field. I agree with him. But I think what we have to be realistic about is that while regulation, and I agree with Mathieu here, regulation gives Europe a lot of influence over how AI is deployed within its borders, it doesn't give influence over the infrastructure and the tools that runs on. So I think we need to move into a space that perhaps the South Koreans have moved into. The Japanese are answering these sovereignty questions with trillions of dollars in infrastructure investment. So I think this is where we need to head. There needs to be a real leveraging of our opportunity and our strategic advantages that we have. We are a big market. We do have a moment. But I think, I think it really comes down to the gains and losses not being distributed sort of fairly, I suppose, globally. AI adoption is absolutely necessary. Any company that is an AI native is going to benefit hugely from these productivity gains. But it comes back to the platform you build on, the infrastructure you commit to, and the data you hand over. That's a geopolitical question. That's a question that I think, we're going to be trying to answer for over the course of this panel, but the next day.
Yeah, of course. I think one thing before I give you the floor, Laura, is the fact that I think it's important to understand that these productivity gains are super important for the future, for countries, but also for workers, because wages are driven by productivity. And so the workers that work for companies that adopt AI might benefit from these productivity gains through higher wages. It's also a big national stakes in terms of income. This is what Mathieu said before, the transfer that we are observing right now. This GDP per capita is extremely important, not only just for the wealth, but for the funding of key infrastructure in the country, for the management of demographic aging in Europe, for instance, and the OECD countries, for the capacity to adapt to climate change also. So I think the stakes are really, really huge from that point of view. So Dora, what do you think of now probably the key aspects at the European level that should be addressed to foster the adoption of AI and to foster these productivity gains?
I think there's several aspects that we've talked about. So firstly, as we said, there's this kind of sovereignty question, which you'll have seen the tech sovereignty package, which has been launched, and that tries to put parts of the tech stack into a kind of pyramid in sort of saying these are at the top, kind of like these are the bits that have to stay European. These are the bits where you might open up more to the world, and these are the bits that we're fully open, and we can have external providers. And now Europe will be trying to roll out that strategy to try to make sure that it's got the sort of protection and sovereignty over the more crucial parts of the tech stack. So I think that's one aspect. The second part that's been mentioned is skills. So there will be a skills strategy coming out, I think, either later this year or next year. And I was hearing earlier this week that digital skills will certainly be part of that. Of course, there's like a question of how much should that be driven at the European level or how much at the member state level. And I think that debate needs to be had in terms of, can countries be doing that? Should we be trying to foster some sort of sharing of knowledge across Europe and the European economies? And then, of course, as we mentioned, infrastructure. So I mentioned the Global Gateway, but also with the Europe's budgets currently being negotiated over the next 6 months, there'll be a big discussion about what funding is available for different regions, which of course has big implications for infrastructure investment. So I think, you see the digital sort of topics coming into a lot of these different policy areas that Europe is working on. But I think part of our job is to be trying to push to raise that ambition and to make sure that the voices of companies and civil society are all included as those strategies are developed.
Okay. Mathieu, Yann,
Rosamund earlier on talked about Europe. Europe is big, so it's an asset. It's a huge market that we have in Europe. But also there are limits in terms of the regulatory limits. I was listening to you, Mathieu, and I think you talked about the trillions invested by America. We don't have the impression that Europe is matching those levels if you look at the capital markets in Europe. So according to you, what should the strategy look like at Europe level so that we can make the best use of our assets? Well, on the one hand, there's production of AI technologies and the adopters. The value chain is different. What we need to do is capture the productivity gains. And there's a difference between those who produce AI and those who adopt AI. There's a salient example of that, which is South Korea. 40 million inhabitants. They have 2 companies that have a good market capitalization, and they're giving us a good wigging. They have 40 million people, and they're beating us. So size, in terms of AI production, doesn't really matter in terms of production of technology, not infrastructure. To tell you the truth, OpenAI, that's 4,000 people, Anthropic, 3,000, 4,000 people, who knows. So we don't need to have a big thing, 450 million, to produce technology. So there's a mismatch, I think. And Korea is a very good example. South Korea is. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. A few weeks ago, I was visiting the worksite on TSMC. It's the biggest chips factory in the US, more than $20 billion invested. I was questioning the workers on the worksite, and the electrical engineers earn $250,000 to $700,000. Electrical engineers. So there are productivity gains captured by some people with OpenAI and Anthropic. Average revenue remuneration is between $2 and $3 million. So there's something happening there in terms of who captures these productivity gains, captures them. We have huge productivity gains, but they're in the hands of the happy few, the ones who produce technology. It will perhaps not last forever. That is, the models are competing with each other. And who knows, with competition, maybe we'll have some type of rebalancing of these distribution of gains. And Europe, is it Europe strong? I don't know. We have a fragmented Europe the Chancellor yesterday said that they will not want the transposition of the EU law in Germany. I think this is absolutely necessary in France as well. And it's a nightmare if you want to have a company at scale in Europe. It's a nightmare. And the evidence of this is that most of the tech companies in France, well, the second market they're thinking about is the US. It's never Germany. Well, very rarely. And if I may, a very final remark, AI is a dual technology, civil and military use. We talked about mythos and others, but we're entering this new world when we have killer apps that are embedded in AI, and so much so that the question of sovereignty, the underlying sovereignty question, should be looked from that lens, because we'll need some type of protection. If we're not able to produce enough technology in these areas, then we'll be hitting the wall. And I'm not saying in 6 months or 2 or 3 years. It's a very topical issue. Okay, before we listen to Jan, you were saying that there are trillions that are invested. Where are they invested? Where's the money invested? Is it in data centers? Is it in production capacity? Is it in the development of models? Well, they cover the whole value chain. Memory, chips, data centers. The data center is where we have the lowest level of value added, and electricity is necessary, but that's not where you can capture value added. So it's the whole ecosystem plus the model.
We need to close and have a few questions from the audience.
Yes, from your question, I come back to what I said in the beginning. I mean, we are in the early stage, very early stage of adoption of AI. And so we shouldn't make the mistake to think the developments we've seen now in the US with the big tech companies that went like this will continue in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I don't believe that we need to panic because of the investments of trillions in data centers in America. I would not advise anybody in Europe to do the same, because I actually think it's a bubble. They won't need this capacity that they are constructing at the moment. And in the end, in 2 or 3 years, it will be very cheap to obtain data center access. And the good thing for Europe is, at least not for the German case, that the big industrial companies in Germany still have their data. They still own it. They didn't give it away to somebody else because they said, we wait for a chance to economize it. So they are actually now looking for ways to use AI for their processes and to use their own processes, for their own processes and for their own industrial AI. Not to give it away, but they know the data is valuable. So we'll see developments in which industrial companies will use AI, as the Germans will do, but they will not have gains like 20, 30, 50%. It's smaller in the industry. And that's also things that start now. We have a good chance now also that Europe will gain a good part of competitivity with industry AI in the next years. And once the companies know how to make money with it, they will invest in what they need. So we shouldn't invest in things we won't need. We should invest in things we know, yes, we need that.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we need to close now. Yes, so thank you so much to all of you. I think it was a great conversation. I learned many, many things. And have a very nice and informative day at X today. Bye.